Hello, I'm James Warren.
And I'm Andy Cushion.
And this is the Denver Urbanism Podcast, a podcast on all things city building in the beautiful city of Dare.
What the hell is Dare?
It's Denver, but with the middle missing. Welcome back to the podcast, everyone. People have been clamoring, but we've released 30 episodes on our Patreon, our secret Patreon, so if you're not already subscribed, sorry, that ship has sailed. Today we're discussing Denver's missing middle project called Unlocking Housing Choices. Andy, what is Unlocking Housing Choices?
Unlocking Housing Choices is, like, for many YIMBYs, the very exciting promise that it was long been promised by Blueprint Denver and other sort of city plans that we would allow basically everywhere in the city more than just one unit a lot. So Unlocking Housing Choices, this is happening in two phases. The first phase is what we're going to be really describing today, but we'll refer a couple times to the second phase. You, I think, know a little bit more background than I do about where this project came from in a sort of political way, as well as the sort of code. Tell me what you know. What is this project for you, James?
Yeah, so when this project was sort of in its incipient stage, I was working for the city, and I had some early conversations with community planning and development who is proposing this change. And really what they wanted to do was change it so that single unit zoning was gone. That lots now were going to be zoned for 4 units by right. That would be a pretty massive change to the zoning code anyway. In terms of how it would manifest in our neighborhoods, it wouldn't be like that significant, particularly over the short run. But in the long run, right, we would see just this gradual densification of all of our neighborhoods. They ran into political obstacles right away. Even the very early proposals of this that made their way to the public don't show 4 units by right, because the conversations with city council behind the scenes showed that city councilors were just kind of saying, nope, that's too far. I can't abide. And so one big lesson right off the bat, city council elections matter. The people who stopped this from being that kind of all-in approach were city councilors. And so vote for your city councilors accordingly. But what we ended up with is a scaled back version of that does increase the allowable density on any given unit in our city, but it isn't that kind of all in 4 units by right. When the city compares what it's doing today to other cities, often it is looking at things more like that, where they said, we're allowing 2 units, 3 units, 4 units with affordability, 6 units by right on different lots, like in Portland, Oregon. They're making some comparisons to cities that have done things like that. This is a much more scaled back version of some of that universal density increasing approaches.
And so the policy now, as I mentioned, the part 1, they are very near to delivering part 1. There's 3 things in this policy, 3 kind of buckets of action that this would do. The first thing is it would reduce the size of new single unit homes. So right now, if you just kind of use the zoning code and use the geometry of a typical lot in Denver, you can build a really big house. And they have some figures on this. I don't feel the need to pull them up specifically. You've seen it when you go to a place like Wash Park. When one of those kind of modest bungalows is torn down, they don't replace it with something twice as big. They replace it with something 3 or sometimes 4 times as big. People don't like that.
No.
This is a big thing that people go to their city council people and tell them they don't like. And so the first thing the policy does is say, we're going to change how much you can build if you're just building 1 unit.
Right.
Then the policy says, if you're building more than 1 unit, you can make a bigger building, but it still needs to be something roughly house scale, right? This wouldn't be legalizing apartments or row homes in buildings, or all across the city. And then there's 2 ways you could kind of access that in this first version of the policy. The first version of the policy says you could access doing more than 1 home on a lot by keeping the original home. And this is in like a ton of city plans. It's actually sort of become something of a sort of sacred cow, I think, to city planners, that like what you should do is you should always keep some structure, some percentage of the structure, or just the whole structure, and then build something else in the back. And that means, because you kept the thing in the front, maybe the smaller unit or the older unit or the more character defining unit, you can build 2 things in the back instead of just one ADU. The final kind of bucket is that this policy would then say, okay. If you're Habitat for Humanity, if you're sort of Northeast Denver Housing Coalition or something like that, you're Shanahan Development, you're like one of these developers that does nonprofit, kind of affordable, for sale housing, you can scrape the lot and you can build as much as you like within the scale of a house. And, there's kind of coming around to basically what the top end of that is. And it just needs to be that one of the units that you do when you scrape the thing and build something new is affordable. Yeah. So that's phase 1 of this policy.
It's interesting that last bit is kind of subverted by the fact that we have the Home Act now, which was passed by the state legislature, which allows affordable housing developers or developers with a history of building affordable housing to build up to 3 stories just anywhere they want. So it'll be interesting to see kind of how that shakes out with the unlocking housing choices and how council decides to implement that here in the city. But I think one of the things I wanted to point out real quick is about preserving the existing structure on the lot and allowing more units to be built on the lot, right? So it's not just building an ADU, right? This is like building even more units. I think up to 3 is the kind of where it sits right now.
I mean, it's really just about the geometry of the lot. If you have like a really small house, let's say like College View is sort of a random neighborhood kind of in West Denver, kind of just off Federal Boulevard. There are really modest small houses on really large lots.
Yeah.
You could probably, on like one of those like, half an acre lots in College View, you could build like a lot of units to the side of that house if you just sort of kept the existing house.
Yeah, there's certainly some NIMBY component to this that people don't like to see the thing that they're familiar with go away. But like we've talked about this before, that existing units in our city are degrading. They are made of worse materials. They have worse insulation. They don't have all stainless steel appliances. And so like these units are just going to be more kind of affordable naturally than some of the newer stuff because newer stuff is expensive to make. I live in a home and the foundation is crumbling beneath it. Home ownership. That makes the home a worse place to live. It also makes it a more affordable home. So, preserving that existing structure plays the role of appeasing the NIMBYs who are aesthetically driven, but it also is an affordability play.
I don't like where this policy has gone.
Yeah, now we're getting into it.
So today is a rare episode where James and I are just going to air our disagreement for you, the public. I hope that you'll both, that you as the public learn a little bit more about the policies we go through this. Would you say you're generally very supportive of this? Like if the version of it that you can see, the draft version of this was proposed, would you be in favor of them just sort of passing it, making it happen?
I support it. I'll also say I'm certainly playing the role of the guy who supports it more, so we can have an interesting podcast.
Okay, sure, that's fine. Okay, great. Well, so for the role of the podcast, James is a foaming at the mouth
supporter,
huge supporter. I'm not saying I'm like the biggest detractor of this policy in the world, but I think it's just bad. And I want to go through 3 reasons why I think it's bad, starting with the strongest reasons and moving to kind of weaker reasons that I still think matter. So the first reason that I think that this policy is bad is kind of interrelated. We already produce missing middle in Denver. It doesn't happen in that many neighborhoods, but it does happen in a GMU3, GRO3, RH zone, across West Colfax, by some parts of, Villa Park here even. There, South Denver, kind of just near like the Evans Station rail line. There are pockets of Denver where we are producing missing middle product right now. One house goes, a triplex goes in its place. One house goes, 6 units go in its place. The way that works and has been proven to work is just upzoning.
Yeah.
At one point you couldn't build more than a house on those pockets of sort of southeast Denver or just South Denver because it's just right off Broadway here. And now, because the zoning allows you to build townhomes and row homes, people just do that.
Yeah.
And it works. So I think that we probably should just look towards the parts of the city where we are producing this type of housing stock and make it work. The core of what I'm saying is this is the wrong approach. This is an approach that sort of adds a new building type to the zoning code and says you can do that unproven building type kind of everywhere in the city.
Yeah.
I don't think it means that like no new homes would be built, but it just doesn't seem like straightforwardly the case that if you wanted the maximum number of new homes to turn over in these areas, that this is the way to do that policy, which I just think is kind of then bad policy, because what we'll be able to do in the next 20 years is people will point back and say, well, look, we passed the policy. Nobody wanted to build more than a single unit home in these lots on these neighborhoods. And, that won't be true then. And yet it'll still sort of make the effort here look bad and engender a huge fight, as it already is doing, on the part of the city council people.
So here's the thing. You are right that in neighborhoods where you have missing middle housing allowed by right, 87% of single unit dwellings that are torn down are replaced with missing middle housing. That's awesome, right? That is exactly what we want. But those are areas where we have allowed that zoning in the first place. And you have to look around and wonder, why hasn't that happened? These are real political concerns, right? That like in my neighborhood and many neighborhoods across the city, people just don't want that zoning at all. And so this isn't like a saying, oh, well, like, why aren't we doing the best thing? Of course we want to do the best thing. And we should continue to do the best thing in addition to this. This just allows additional density and provides another relief valve for a housing crisis all across the city, while being sensitive to the political concerns that council members have. One thing that I know that my councilwoman, Jamie Torres, has talked about is she said, how come all this development happened in my district? There was so much rezoning and the intensity really just took over my district. And that created a lot of neighborhood change that not everybody's been very comfortable with. I sympathize with that concern. Unlocking Housing Choices is a citywide program that meets her goals. It's going to meet Kevin Flynn's goals. It's going to meet Cashman's goals. It's going to meet various people on council and, push them toward allowing more density, even in their own neighborhoods, because everybody's getting it. So I hear you. I agree. I think if we could just say, let's do more missing middle housing across the city, that'd be great. But we're living in political reality.
But that's not like an actual, reason. That's a political reason. If the policy here is about allowing more types of homes to be built in single unit communities, the idea then is to create this new type of structure where which is house scale. This will be the term of art that you see when you read the policy, house scale, but contains multiple units in it. We have some examples of some of those things, like tandem houses do exist in Denver, essentially kind of a bigger ADU in the back, which exceeds kind of the sort of rules for that and just becomes another primary residence. Duplexes do exist in Denver, but this is not going to be a very meaningful policy if the only thing that happens is it allows duplexes or tandem houses, because we know what those structures look like and those pencil out. I think all of the people who actually liked the sort of highest and best version of this policy liked the highest and best version of this policy where it was like 4plexes or 6plexes in every lot. There's really no evidence that this kind of new building type that they're going to authorize with these new rules around scale is going to produce that 4 to 6plex version. And this whole preservation thing is nonsense. Again, when you look at the parts of the city where when a single family house goes and it's replaced with missing middle, which is what we say we want, it requires the single family house to be demolished.
Yeah.
There's a lot of reasons why, not just aesthetically or selfishly, you demolish the existing structure. Grading, water, utilities, access to the street, access to the alley. There's actually a lot of problems when if you just say we have to leave the existing house and build something new around it. Even on those biggest lots, you're going to run into issues that you really can't control because of this political negotiation to keep the existing structure.
Well, all of these things can be said too of the ADU policy, and maybe you hate the ADU policy, right? But it is not the solution to our housing problems. We need the highest and best version. We need better zoning. We need more dense apartments. We need more walkable neighborhoods that are caused by mixing uses. But ADUs are good. And there are many people, and I have people in my life who are building ADUs. They are not interested in vacating their home. They're not interested in selling their home to somebody who would build a denser structure there. They want to stay in their home. But for them, it's nice to build an additional structure, have family move in, maybe get additional rent or something like that from that structure. And the people who are motivated by that might be motivated by unlocking housing choices to build additional structures in their backyard as well. And that is just putting more units on the market. And we're talking about a difference between a reality where none of that is happening or a little bit of that is happening. And a little bit of that happening is good.
I mean, but it's not the case that none of that is happening. Like, in many pockets of the neighborhood, we are getting a lot more missing middle housing. Like,
Sure.
it is happening. And so then I just, again, I know we've already litigated the point, but I just think that, like, the dream world is getting the NIMBYs to believe, well, no, we don't have a precedent for this, which is why we need this policy. But the actual world is, we do have precedent for this. It's working in the neighborhoods where it exists. It does result in a lot of neighborhood change. It does result in a lot of the scraping and the turnover that people don't like. We've put in a lot of other policies that relate to trying to decrease the scale of houses. For instance, the linkage fee with EHA applies to buildings over, like, there's a higher linkage fee you pay if the gross floor area of your building is over a certain size. I recently covered on Twitter, Build Up Denver, there's a sort of double duplex. One home that's being sort of demolished in South Denver, just off of Pearl Street between Ellsworth and Bayard. Many people might have even seen this construction project starting already. It's near, like, Uncle Ramen and a couple places people like. That double duplex, right, is not subject to EHA. They can't right now sort of opt in to an affordability agreement. They probably wouldn't want to anyways. It's going to cost $17,000 per unit that these people are paying to build this product. So, like, I just don't think that, like, if it's still penciling out to build 4 units in a place where there was 1 right now in Denver with one weird trick, and it's paying money into, like, the resources that will then allow for future affordability to exist, I think we should just do that one weird trick in more places in Denver.
Well, what's to stop anyone from continuing to do that one weird trick in many places in Denver, and also having this other thing that provides housing in other cases, right? So again, you're somebody who doesn't want to sell your lot. You want to live on your lot, but you don't use your backyard a lot. It's a big backyard. You could build 2 or 3 units, right? That's 2 or 3 units that are now on the market. Your existing structure's been preserved, and that pleases some people. And now there's 3 new homes in the city. Like, I think that you're kind of thinking as a dichotomy between, we have to choose between missing middle housing, or we have to choose this unlocking housing choices. And the reality is we can do unlocking housing choices, and then we can continue to rezone for missing middle all across the city.
I think, though, that won't happen. I think that the thing you identified at the top of the episode here as the kind of political negotiation is a way to stop future missing middle from happening in a way that would be consistent with city plans by allowing this kind of new policy that no one has tried yet to sort of take the place of those ambitions.
Okay, well, just a second ago, I was saying politics is reality, and you were really pushing back on that, and now you're saying politics is reality.
What I'm saying is politics isn't an excuse out of the premise, right?
Okay, so then let's do unlocking housing choices and the missing middle housing, right? Because politics isn't an excuse.
Well, then the negotiated thing here I'll say is, if the policy passes, I don't think it's going to ruin things. I just don't think it's going to be very helpful.
Sure.
And so if in time it turns out Andy, Mr. Boy Scout here, was right that actually, like, more missing middle is being produced in existing zones where you're allowed to build row homes and townhouses, I'm not telling people I told you so. I'm not telling you that, dear listener. But you're welcome to come up to me at the next Urbanist Happy Hour and tell me, wow, I didn't realize that you were right. Again, it's not to say that this policy is going to engender really bad things. I would have started at the top with my disagreement if I thought that this policy was going to create bad circumstances. I just think it's, like, actually the wrong way to go about creating missing middle. So that was my sort of thing at the top.
Let me lob up something to you, and I want to hear what you think. So I think one of the effects of this could be that because you have a cluster of a few homes that have decided to do an unlocking housing choices, and they're near a collector street in a neighborhood. And in one reality, that was never done. and these are all just single unit homes. And some developer comes along and says, I want to build mixed use development on this corner. And people say, the neighborhood context isn't quite right. It's, it's kind of the density's out of proportion. We're going to deny it. In this other reality, it's slightly denser around that corner. There's more units. There's more people there already. And so the reviewers look at that and they say, you know what, actually, it fits in the context a little bit better. We will rezone that for missing middle housing. We will rezone that for a mixed-use development. I think that one of the effects of this could be that sometimes what you see is townhomes going up next to single units, and people go, it's just so out of context. But by sprinkling in a little bit more density here and there, you're going to make those transitions a bit easier and make people a little bit more comfortable with allowing that missing middle housing.
You've brought me to my second disagreement. I'm not kidding. You've brought me right to my second disagreement with this policy. I think that this policy is being created and sort of supported pretty much on aesthetic grounds.
Yeah.
I think that urbanists prefer neighborhoods with a mix of housing typologies. Why do I say that? Because that was what they lobbied to get into Blueprint Denver, was like housing diversity is a metric that the city sort of studies. And I think that aesthetic desire to see the mixing of housing typologies is actually like a bit of a distraction from the fact that we do already have neighborhoods that have gotten way the hell more dense in the last 10 years, when Denver has really just exploded with the number of units and apartment buildings, and that quality of life in those neighborhoods really needs to be focused on, so that the people who now live in those very dense parts of neighborhoods need to actually have, I think that's worth urbanists' time and energy, is to focus on the places where major increases in density have been realized, major new housing has been delivered. Focus on what made those neighborhoods happen and change, and then make those things maximally successful, so that then the proposition of just an apartment building somewhere in Villa Park, as opposed to a number of scattered sort of, missing middle style house scale buildings, go in Villa Park. An apartment building at that corner of the Collector is going to justify by itself a mixed sort of unit, mixed use kind of thing, in a way that you're sort of saying that we have to have or not have to, but the kind of narrative that is being kind of given here is that, this will allow for a gradual scale and a change of context. And it's because that's what urbanists is they like it to look different and have a mix. And I also like that, but I just think that there are other ways to achieve that mix, which involves allowing for apartment buildings at the corner of collector streets or something like that in a given neighborhood, as opposed to messing around with this. We put 3 units in the back and now we're ready for a local bakery. I think it's an aesthetic preference masquerading as a policy idea.
Well, sure, but the aesthetic preference is what it boils down to, and what these political decisions boil down to at the end of the day anyway. If you look at the unlocking housing choices, people say, in response to, are there any aspects of recently constructed homes you dislike or think could be improved? People say increasing size and perceived bulk of new homes, particularly when they replace smaller existing structures. If you look through the literature on what the feedback was that they got, it's just NIMBY town. It is ruled by NIMBYs. Really important that we all show up to these things. Andy and I showed up to some unlocking housing choices fora, and I encourage everybody to show up to those things when you can, because it's very important. But you are right that this is an aesthetic preference, but we're also talking about that's the reality, right? The neighborhood groups that are sending letters into their council people are largely driven by aesthetic preferences, And so if they say, well, look, aesthetically, it already feels a little more dense on that corner. Let's just rezone that for missing middle housing or a mixed use development or an apartment building, because it already kind of aesthetically feels that way. That is reality. That is we've achieved the best and highest, solution through that reality. Even if, I think in some perfect world, we would be driven by things other than preferences about how a place looks or feels. We would say, people need housing. Let's build housing. It's better for people to have places they can walk to. Let's build places people can walk to. But that's not how things are getting done. I would like it to be different too. But if the practical solution is to do it this way, it seems like let's do it this way.
And I'm telling you that we moved from stronger to weaker. I think I do agree with a lot of what you're saying. I just don't think that it will be then persuasive to the NIMBYs, right?
Yeah.
Like, because at its core, we are still asking them to accept a neighborhood change. And the story that we're telling is one of introducing diverse housing typologies into predominantly single unit neighborhoods. And the NIMBYs will just go, no.
Yeah, I think this is something where, like, a peek behind the screen of James's real opinions. NIMBYs are going to NIMBY.
Yeah.
And we just, like, can't, like, assume that these are people acting in good faith.
Yeah, like, this is an aesthetic good faith argument that will, I think, be met with bad faith on the part of the NIMBY.
Right. So, okay, well, let's move on. Do you have a third and final argument?
I have a third and final argument for why I don't think this policy is the right approach. I think that this is ahistorical. I think if you look at actual, like, moments in time in Denver where Missing Middle was delivered, you see that there's a couple specific moments where this has happened. I think the best version of this policy allows for the transformation of the large mansions that have been built in a lot of the city into, like, new subdivided apartment buildings and stuff like that, right? Like, that is how a lot of the kind of missing middle that a lot of the people who have been on this committee and have shown up and talked about happened. Reducing the size of, like, the homes that can be built is then not in that way contributing to the future conversion of those homes. I think that's ahistorical. The mansions that were once in a very exclusive territory in Cap Hill are now the working class housing through a mixture of depreciation and zoning ability to subdivide. Additionally,
Andy says build more mansions.
Well, if you make a policy that allows to subdivide mansions in exclusive areas of the city, which this policy potentially could do. Like, I mean, I think if it ended up with a case that we got a bunch of, like, apartment buildings in Hilltop because people just took these, like, 7,000 square foot mansions and subdivided them into apartments, that'd actually be pretty sick. Like, I'm okay with that. This is one of the reasons why it's a weaker argument. But it's not, like, that's not how. Like, they're doing the opposite of the pathway towards making those kinds of conversions possible in the future. But the other ahistorical part is, if you really want to engender missing middle housing, what you have to do is you have to open, like, a new transit line.
Yeah, sure.
Like, we've talked about this in the past. I made a joke, I think, in maybe this Jingalong, kind of episode.
Jingalong.
The
Jingle Bell Spectacular.
The Jingle Bell Holiday Very Merry Spectacular. I said that, like, the biggest thing you could do to increase housing production was propose a bunch of new transit lines and then never build them.
Right.
That was, and that is, like, that works. Like, the reason that West Colfax blew up with missing middle housing south of 13th Avenue is because the W line is there. It's the reason why some of these sort of missing middle in Villa Park is being built as well. It's not the reason that, like, missing middle is being built exactly everywhere, but I think it's just the case that, like, if you want to engender people to sort of convert their existing lowest use to a higher and better use, you have to come along as the public sector with an investment in that neighborhood that makes the neighborhood more desirable for more people.
Yeah.
And that's just, like, again, not my best take here, because there are plenty of neighborhoods people want to live in that they can't currently live in right now because the only thing you can build is single family home and it's being built really big and it's really expensive, etc. That doesn't, like, address that issue. But, like, it's just, there's a way that we saw missing middle engendered in certain parts of Denver.
Yeah.
And I think it's fair to say that, like, if we wanted to continue engendering that, we probably have to commit to more transit expansions or streetscape expansions.
Yeah, I guess I would just say that, like, history is not necessarily always a great guide when it comes to how to, like, equitably build housing in our city.
He's got a point.
And like, this should not be our only tool in our toolbox here, but it does seem like this is going to, like, bring more housing into more places in the city that otherwise might not get any new housing at all. And if it does that, then it's bringing new neighbors in. Those neighbors are going to be people who might otherwise have lived in the far-flung suburbs. And, like, historicity aside, it's good to have another tool in the toolbox. I kind of think that if we just, like, went back to some very kind of historical thing where it's just, like, build wherever you want, and allowed people to just build more, that would be better. But, like, if we're looking back at kind of the history of city planning, giving people more ways to build seems good to me.
Well, and to that point, as you say, the actual history here is that a lot of the missing middle stock in Denver's sort of older neighborhoods, was built before the invention of like Euclidean style zoning.
Right.
Like that's true. And I think supports my point, which is that we're creating a new thing in the zoning code that doesn't exist right now and expecting that to contain our ambitions versus essentially kind of deregulating. Right? Like I think the deregulation path, because I guess I'm a foaming at the mouth capitalist whenever I'm on the microphone here, is like kind of the way that might work.
Whenever we look at like the zoning, we're like, man, our zoning code is so broken and it results in no housing getting built. I have an idea. Another
Let's add
layer.
More. Keep going.
Do more rules on zoning. It's not great. Okay. Well, dear listener, I hope you've learned a little bit about this, and I hope that the argumentation style is interesting. We're trying to get more clicks, and we read that having it be contentious and angry the whole time is the way we do it. So,
and I read something different that says that if I disagree with James, people think I'm hotter.
You're a fool. You're a dang fool. Thanks for listening, y'all.
The Denver Urbanism podcast is a production of longtime blog Denver Infill and sister blog Denver Urbanism. Please keep in touch and look online at denverurbanism.com, which will be changing soon. Woo!
Spoilers.
And we look forward to hearing what you think in the comments below.